As a citizen of the United States and son of immigrant parents, you are told that you have a better shot than most to make something of yourself. By something, they are referring to the American dream. The truth is that this shot you have is no better than someone living in the UK or Australia. That is because the success that the American dream promises, so long as you have the aspirations to achieve it, no longer exists. American policies have long been put in place to hinder the American and immigrant people from ever achieving the American dream. They have contributed to the false narrative of the American dream, the unattainability of this dream by American citizens, and the negative effects on communities. Put simply, policy is intertwined with almost every aspect in which the American dream fails to realize its own promise. From my point of view, we have been raised to believe that the United States provides something most countries don't. But how much of that is just misinformation? As my mother shares the story, I'd like for you to keep in mind that millions of others share the same perspective.
¿Cómo imaginabas la vida en Estados Unidos antes de llegar?
Bonita, bonita y pues muy diferente a la que tenía en México.
Es lo que te decían.
Es lo que me decían
De Estados Unidos.
que se ganaba mucho dinero, que vivías bien, que estabas muy bien económicamente y que todo era fácil. Sobre todo que todo era súper fácil.
¿Hubo algún momento en que te diste cuenta de que el sueño americano podría no ser lo que esperabas?
Sí,
¿En qué momento?
en el momento que llegué aquí y empecé a trabajar y vi que la vida no era igual, que no era vivir la vida así como me decían, como me platicaban.
¿En qué aspecto trabajar?
¿En qué aspecto trabajar? De llegar aquí y a la semana que llegué aquí ya me tenía un trabajo hecho de 12 horas, de domingo a domingo, de que no tenía ni un día de descanso.
¿Qué fue lo más difícil de adaptarte a la vida de Estados Unidos?
Creo que estar sin mi familia.
¿Y crees que las oportunidades de las que hablan aquí son reales para los inmigrantes?
Algunas sí, algunas dirías que sí son verdad, pero no todas en el aspecto cuando te dicen de que venir aquí es la solución de los problemas, no de los problemas, sino de las carencias que uno tiene en su país.
Si pudieras regresar, ¿harías el viaje? ¿Por qué sí o por qué no?
¿Por qué no? Sería porque dejé a mis papás allá, dejé muchas cosas que aquí no se disfrutan, dejas más que tu infancia, tu juventud.
¿Qué significa el sueño americano para ti ahora? ¿Ha cambiado?
Sí, porque no es un sueño americano. Sí. Como te decía anteriormente, es que no es como te lo dicen. Si a mí me hubiesen dicho la realidad, no hubiese venido de mi país.
Ok, gracias.
My mother mentioned something very important that I'd like you to keep in mind while I progress to the following section, which is the exclusiveness of this dream. The article from NPR, Is the American Dream Worth the Risk?, mentions how immigrants flee their country in hopes for a safer and more stable life, but instead, they are met with rejection of ever achieving that dream. A policy put in place by President Trump made it so immigrants seeking asylum could be expelled right away before pleading their case. This is a huge problem that has left millions waiting on their asylum requests to be processed, living in poor conditions in the meantime. Another aspect that fuels this, as mentioned by the article, that the American dream has been romanticized a lot. This can be seen in what my mother first heard when she was living in Mexico and thinking about moving to the United States. Immigrants are led to believe that the American dream is guaranteed and that it is only available in the United States. But just as the article states, we need to tell citizens of the world that these dreams can be built wherever you are. Many immigrants want what the American dream supposedly offers, but how much of that dream is a reality in this day and age? This story that is told to immigrants is no different than the one taught to American citizens, but the citizens are the ones who experience the wide gap between them and that dream. An interview from the CBS News on What Happened to the American Dream talks about how some of the main economic problems which we as a society now face are due not only from flawed policies, but from the lack of policy itself. There have been countless political leaders who claim to be able to fix what is one of the main pillars of the American dream, which is the economy, but have either put laws which take years to take effect, have no effect at all, or they simply don't enact any useful policies. The interviewee talks about how it will take focus and real dedication from both political leaders and the people to truly fix this problem. The main problem is that countless issues need to be addressed, which makes it so that no problem is addressed. We will see further effects of the lack of policy later when we touch on the book The Other Westmore. The article written by Patrick Barkey on affordable housing talks about the instability of rising housing prices and income, further widening the gap between those in search of the American dream and those who can afford a home. The article mentions how although policies have been put in place to help shorten this gap, evidence of their effectiveness is unconvincing. He goes on to say that these policies are often worsening the situation. This widening gap between the affordability of owning a home creates yet another issue caused by the lack of input from government officials. Home ownership being one pillar of the American dream, we can see how the American citizens are further hindered from that dream. We should take a step back and look into one of the steps taken early on in life to one day be able to achieve such a dream, which is education. An article written by Travis Roundu named Losing the Public in Higher Education states that there have been many times over the past decade, poor policy making made by states has led to colleges raising tuition, leaving the students having to pay large amounts of money and having to be burdened by loans. As the article states, public colleges and universities are becoming less public at the very time that the public's expectations of access to higher education has never been higher. What this means is that while jobs and communities uphold an expectation for higher education, it has continuously become harder and harder to access. You might say that higher education is not part of the American dream, but it is a critical step in obtaining that dream when there is a growing trend of jobs requiring some sort of higher education. This is yet another byproduct of poor policies that hinder, in this case, a younger generation from even attempting to reach their version of the American dream. But what happens when the government does enact a law with the supposed intention of helping the people in obtaining this dream? The UDAG program established by Jimmy Carter was a great example of this, a program put in place to help communities in need, which was later terminated by Congress, along with the Reagan administration being opposed to it. The main reason this program was terminated was due to, as reported by the article, legislators were not convinced that the funds were being awarded for an appropriate use. The problem with the UDAG was that it did not fulfill in every aspect that it promised, and combined with the Reagan administration, which threatened to terminate the program, was a mix that ultimately led Congress to get rid of the program and redistribute the funding. Whether the Congress decision to terminate the program was a right call could be debatable, but strictly looking at it, it was in many ways a poorly managed program. Looking at the bigger picture, there's a very serious issue because it means that the government cannot effectively produce policies that can help a large minority have a fair shot at achieving the American dream, something it promises. There are many technical and political issues with the lack of poor policymaking, but putting statistics aside, what are the more individualistic and emotional impacts of this broken American dream? The Other Wes Moore, One Name, Two Fates, written by Wes Moore, draws out perfectly the environments that this flawed dream creates. There are many instances where we see from either Moore's perspective that oftentimes people are born into circumstances where choices are made for them, both for better and for worse. Take housing for example, as I mentioned before. In chapter 2 of the book, it is said, the uplands became home to a thriving middle class, while the over 1,700 units in Cherry Hill became a breeding ground for poverty, drugs, and despair. This is a small piece that highlights the huge difference between two groups of people made simply by where they live, something that can be very much be influenced by policy. Whether that may be because you can't afford a home, or because you can't make enough to move out such an area. Or take this other excerpt, which speaks about how dangerous these underdeveloped areas can be. As stated by the third chapter, those murders were concentrated in a handful of neighborhoods, and the victims were concentrated in a single demographic, young black men. In some neighborhoods, the young men would have been safer living in war zones. This piece shows how the people living in these neighborhoods fall victim of the lack of structure in communities, which is due to a lack of awareness and support from people in power. It shows how they can target and penetrate certain areas, forever changing the lives in those areas. The kids born in these areas are raised in these zones, with what seems like no escape from the life they were born in, a life that hinders them from ever achieving anything, including the American dream. The rest of the book follows the same order. It talks about a flawed policy or lack of policy, and it shows the direct effect of it. From either Wes Moore's perspective, the book sets a tone for what America is supposed to be and what the American dream is supposed to provide. In its essence, it means a fair shot for anybody regardless of background or situation, a meaning that has drifted far from its original intent. My mother came into this country hearing about a story that may have at some point existed, but no longer did. Even so, that story was told to millions of people around the world, not in any way limited to the American people themselves. And so when they found themselves in a position to make even an attempt to access the American dream, they were blindsided by the series of obstacles that now lay in front of them. Whether that was when they tried to follow higher education or when they attempted to buy their first home, they would soon realize that the story they had been told was no more, which begs the question of whether it ever existed. The answer to that is that it did, and it can one day live again. As cliche as it may sound, so long as the American people stand up and actively participate in fighting for the American dream, it can very well be a reality once again. Better said by Dolores Huerta, every moment is an organizing opportunity, every person a potential activist, every minute a chance to change the world. This is to say, you are never too little to make a difference. And so I want to end my documentary with one final request, which is to never forget what the American dream represents, and if necessary, to fight for every aspect of it, so that generations to come can be born into a dream that does not have to stay on their pillows. My name is Luis Martinez, and thank you for listening.